This holiday, would you rather buy this TV or get one for free? For a limited time only, bring home a free 43-inch Samsung Smart TV when you sign up on Link with DTV Plus today. Just imagine your favorite movies, shows, and more, all in stunning quality on your brand new screen. Visit DocomoPacific.com or see us in store to learn more. Docomo Pacific, better together.
Kandit News is brought to you by 76 Circle K Guam.
Good evening, Guam. It is 9:05 p.m. on Thursday, January 2nd, 2025. I'm Troy Torres, and I'm tired. It's late at night for me. But when you're in the news, but also when you run your own small business, there is no such thing as a break, and there is no such thing as overtime. So it is what it is. In order to do my job, sometimes I have to come to you live at 9:05 p.m., tired as a mofo, not expecting any overtime payment whatsoever from the government of Guam. The public auditor has just come out with another audit. I have to say this, another audit in a long list of audits since not just the Leon Guerrero administration, but since the Calvo administration, where he alleges criminal activity in the government of Guam. Before we get to that, got to pay the bills on top of our video ads that you just saw in the run up to this show. We also got our Wendy's dollar drink, and it's been hot during the daytime. If you are anywhere in the area, in any one of several of Wendy's stores here in Guam, in Barragata, Tamuning, Dededo, Aganya, stop by. Their drinks are just $1. Ice cold drinks, soft drinks available all day, anytime that Wendy's is open. Just check them out. So, where's this stupid thing? Oh, there it is. I'm not a technology person, so I have to every now and then search for things on this system. Anyway, excuse me. So, the latest audit by the public auditor was released 2 nights ago. He audited, the Office of Public Accountability audited overtime between fiscal years 2018 and 2023. That's a 6-year period. That encompasses the last 2 fiscal years of Eddie Calvo's term and the first 4 fiscal years of Lou Leon Guerrero's term. And why the governors are important here is because Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense is a line agency with an operational structure very much tied into the governor's office. Let me explain, and I'll explain how overtime there works. When I was in the government of Guam, in the Calvo administration, in the first 4 years, I held a position called Director of Communications. And anytime there was an emergency activation, I had a dual role. I was not just the Director of Communications, I also became the Joint Information Coordinator, which is the person who's in charge of assembling all of the communication from the government, the military, the federal government, and the private sector in order to compile that information and get it out to the community. And you also have to work with the operations side of Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense during an emergency activation. It's actually a very tough job, Joint Information Coordinator. And so I hated any time that there was an emergency activation. Now, when you have an emergency activation, there's the expectation that you're going to be working beyond your regular hours. And so exempt employees, like we were at the governor's office, we were unclassified, we're considered exempt employees. We are never supposed to make overtime, ever, except during an emergency activation, and only because the federal grant allows it And well, because it's the right thing to do as well, because it is possible that you can be working for days on end without going home, especially if it's like a typhoon that you're working through, that you're coordinating. And so, but because these are federal grants that are being used, the major funding for Homeland Security Civil Defense is two major federal grants that fund personnel, operations, overtime, all that stuff, right? Because these are federal grants, there are very specific protocols that you have to follow. And I remember this very clearly. On top of all the paperwork, all the local paperwork having to be just, done, the declaration of a disaster, the executive order from the governor, the standing up of the Emergency Operations Center, the standing up of the Joint Information Center, you start to fill out timesheets. And every day, I remember this, every day you had to clock in. And whenever you left or whenever you went on a break, you would clock out. Not only that, you would have to sign timesheets every single day. And your supervisor, so I was basically the supervisor of everyone who was working in the Joint Information Center whenever there was an emergency operation. I would have to sign off on their time, and I hated doing it. I hated signing anything whenever I was in the government because I didn't like to be responsible for anything more than I was already responsible for, and I certainly didn't want to be signing anything that was going to send me to jail. And that was just my local responsibility as a supervisor in the Joint Information Center. Now, there were several steps of accountability, checks and balances. This was during the first 4 years of the Calvo administration. This was also the case throughout the Camacho administration. The Camacho administration, I mean, they really set the tone for unqualified fiscal responsibility and good government, especially when it came to emergency activations. You will be hard pressed to find nefarious activity when it came to emergency activations during the Camacho administration. You'd also be hard pressed to find that in the first 4 years of the Calvo administration. And I remember how strict everything was, because it wasn't just my signature as a supervisor on those timesheets. There was the certifying officer, there was the grants officers, there was the administrative services officer, there was the civil defense administrator, and then the Homeland Security advisor. There were so many levels of checks and balances because of this was the administration of federal grants. One, but secondly, because when you're in an emergency activation, it's the risk and the potential of making a mistake is it's so heightened because everyone's moving so quickly. So all of these processes, they're in place and people know it, especially those who work at Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense. They're supposed to know it like the back of their hand. And it's part of the reason, part of the grant funding that GHS OCD gets is to always be prepared. So they're supposed to have all of these practices, these tabletop exercises, and all of the different components of emergency management, including the administrative side, are supposed to practice all of these things so that you don't get it wrong. And the consequences of getting it wrong are dire. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory can serve me correctly, an audit by Premier Group, and the public auditor in this current audit alludes to it, the audit by Premier Group, the previous one about GHS OCD, confirmed that GHS OCD for several years now has not been funded through those grants because of the high-risk grant status resulting from the poor management of the grants under the Leon Guerrero administration. So one of the most dire consequences of not following procedures in emergency management is the federal government not remitting the grant funds to you. The federal government saying, you know what, you spend local funds first on whatever it is. Then you write us a report about how you believe that the use of these local funds meets our standards and our regulations for the payment of federal funds, and will reimburse you that money. During times of fiscal distress, that is debilitating. That can be devastating for recovery efforts in the island. And we saw that in the recovery of Super Typhoon Pongsona, when because of the mismanagement of funds from Super Typhoon Paka in 1997 and the audits that followed there, and the federal government saying, no way, Gov Guam, we are not fronting you the money. You can ask for reimbursements. You're going to have to use local funds for your recovery, and then we'll reimburse you when we're satisfied with the paperwork. And that led to so much chaos and so much hurt and inability to help people following Super Typhoon Pongsona. If any of you remembered how long the recovery took then. It took the Camacho administration, then the Calvo administration, really making amends with the federal government and the federal grantors to get to a place where we no longer had to use the reimbursement formula. We just got the funds. They trusted us with the funds. And because we did all the paperwork right, we went through all the processes and whatever. Yeah, there were things that happened here and there, but didn't rise to the level of, the sort of federal scrutiny that would take the funds away. And of course, the most critical thing about that when you're taking the funds away is the ability for the government to react and to respond and to recover following some sort of natural or man-made disaster. And so you have this audit now coming out and just saying everything that we were taught not to do when we were in the government. And I'm a little surprised that the beginning part of this bad audit is the final 2 years of the Calvo administration. I don't know where I wasn't there anymore. I don't know where things went wrong in the Calvo administration. I'm going to guess Eddie Calvo had his foot off the wheel and Ray Tenorio, because he was the running for governor, and Eddie Calvo wanted to give him, some sort of leeway to show his leadership. My suspicion is that these final 2 years of the Calvo administration and the damning allegations in this audit have a lot to do with Ray Tenorio's leadership more than Eddie Calvo's. I know Eddie Calvo. That guy was a stickler for fiscal responsibility and doing things by the book when it came to finances and the administration, especially of federal grants. And he did not ever want to have a black eye in an audit. And so I can't imagine that Eddie Calvo was in any way directly involved and responsible because he was the governor, but directly responsible for this mismanagement of grant funds. And this is an audit, my friends. This is not simply a news report. This is not an allegation by a disgruntled employee. This is an independent audit that shows that of $3.3 million in overtime costs that were tested by the audit between fiscal years 2018 and 2023, $2.8 million of that are questioned by the audit, and not just by the audit, but not going to be reimbursed by the federal government because the way that the government of Guam obligated that overtime was against federal grant rules and were unallocable. For most of these overtime payments, there aren't even documents to back them up, the timesheets. Remember, I was telling you just a few minutes ago about how critical it was that every single day of the emergency activation, you had to sign timesheets. You had to clock in and you had to clock out. There was a record of that. That record had to match up with the timesheets. The signature on the timesheets had to match the signature of the supervisor. The signature of the supervisor had to match who the supervisor was on shift. Who the supervisor was on shift had to match whatever the governor's orders were, the civil defense administrator and the Homeland Security advisor's understanding of who were the officers at what time, match that against who's clocked in and who clocked out on that day and that time. That's how strict this stuff is. And so of $3.3 million, $2.8 million question costs had to be fronted by the government of Guam because of Guam's bad management of these grants. Which raises another question, and that is, how the hell did Homeland Security Civil Defense spend $2.8 million plus, because this is not involving all of the other operations over over this period when the federal grants weren't being used. How did they do that without a legislative appropriation? Isn't that illegal? And the audit raises many questions, not just about the timesheets and the record keeping and the abrogation of duties against executive orders and laws, but it talks about certifying officers. And this is a pretty big deal. Whoever's signature was there under the certifying officers, because there's a statute that we've had in the books since the Gutierrez administration. If I'm not mistaken, it's a Ben Pangilinan statute. Essentially, what it does is it explains the responsibilities of a certifying officer, which essentially is you cannot certify the use of public funds in an illegal way. That's just the Cliff's Notes of it, right? And then it says that if you do that, not only are you liable to personally pay back whatever was inappropriately or illegally expended, you can go to prison if you're convicted of a criminal misdemeanor of the misapplication of these funds and the certification of these funds, and go to prison for up to 3 years for each count for which you're convicted. This is a big deal. And here's the thing. Last night, I went on a whole spiel about cronyism and how it's, the foundation of corruption, especially in the government of Guam and the CNMI. And of course, Kandit for the past few years, since our inception, has just been this anti-corruption outfit, right? If there has been one consistent vanguard of integrity and trust in this government, aside from the courts of law, and the courts are limited in what they can do. We can trust the courts when a case gets there, but a case ain't going to get there if a case isn't made. And the only institution that has really been making the case against corruption has been the Office of Public Accountability, has been Public Auditor Benjamin B.J. Cruz. And this audit should not surprise us. However, the fact that this audit is just the latest in several audits where the public auditor has shown us, the public, and the Attorney General, and the legislature, and the governor, evidence, black and white, by the numbers, evidence of criminal activity in the government of Guam. The fact that there hasn't been a single conviction stemming from any of these audits speaks wonders about the efficacy of the officers of this government to do something about corruption. The public auditor has served this and previous audits, several of them, on a silver platter. And I have to ask, where is the prosecution of these crimes? Where is the legislative reform that many of these audits have demanded, that senators make? Where is the excitement from the governor and from her administration, or from the previous governor and his administration, to make the fixes that these audits have said to make? We are going now on the 6th year of the Leon Guerrero administration, which means that Public Auditor B.J. Cruz himself has been rolling out audits for 7 years, because he became the public auditor in the final year of the Calvo administration. And gosh, from Gura to ambulances to the E911 fund to Simon Sanchez High School, JFK development, several audits, damning audits about the hospital, the whole procurement of the Pacific Star Hotel, several audits about the pandemic, Department of Education, grant funds. This is not the first audit that was damning against Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense, but this is probably the worst one. And nothing. This guy's done all this work. Great work that we elected him to do. You know, perhaps this is a time for the new legislature to consider adopting a statute that the CNMI has. In the CNMI, it isn't just the Attorney General who can bring corruption charges against somebody. The Office of the Public Auditor in the CNMI can take a public official or previous public official to court, have that public official charged with crimes involving corruption. Perhaps we should empower our Office of Public Accountability to do the same. Because, my goodness, he's produced all of this evidence of corruption in the government of Guam. And this latest one, I haven't even gone into the details of it. I told you about the $2.8 million. There's one employee number one in this, over this 6-year period, raked in $775,000. More than half of that was overtime. This employee in the first 4 of those 6 years worked overtime straight for 4 years. And the reason given for the working of that overtime, the position was Administrative Services Officer. ASO is what they're commonly called. They're really big dogs within agencies. They have the ability to sign off on a whole lot of stuff, right? In the first 4 years, the reason given for the overtime for those 4 years straight was that this person was working on fixing issues with the federal grants, the same federal grants that failed, where GHS OCD was found to have mismanaged them. Incredible stuff. 10 people, this audit found, took in $1.8 million in overtime. And here I am at 9:26 p.m. after spending an incredible amount of time working today, not making a single dime, especially in overtime. Even when I was in the government, even when I worked those long hours during emergency activations, I think the biggest check in overtime that I ever got was like $9,000. And let me tell you, it was absolutely like I earned every single penny of that. But for someone to more than double their take-home pay, more than double their gross pay by working overtime consistently over a 6-year period, and to take home $775,000 in a staff level position over a 6-year period. Wow. Incredible stuff, my dear friends. And this isn't the first finding of questionable and probably illegal activity. This isn't the first brushing up or exposure of criminal activity in the government of Guam, and it sure as heck won't be the last. I can guarantee you that. But where are the results? Where is the actual accountability beyond the reports by the Office of Public Accountability? The only institution in this government that seems to be doing the job that we want our leaders to do. Rooting out, calling out corruption in a very official way, independently and with credibility. Where's everybody else? I asked, a few days ago, I asked the Attorney General about a certain case, and his response to me is, we have no comment. What I'm hoping about that case, about this audit, about the previous audits, is that the Attorney General's office actually is working on prosecutions, and that they just can't say anything because they're in the middle of the investigations. It's been 2 years, though, since the Attorney General has been in office, And I'm getting a little worried that the clock is running. And that this guy who came to office with so much passion, and us as voters having so much expectation that he is going to do something about corruption, I'm worried that the clock is running out and that these audits, this evidence prepared by the public auditor, who was the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice at one time, a lifetime attorney, knows exactly what he's doing. It's right there. And I just don't want it all to go to waste. Oh gosh. I mean, it has got to be something to be in this lame duck administration trying to rush all these good things to the finish line before Governor Lulian Guerrero is out of office. But at the same time, having to deal with these demons, this bad conduct over the past 6 years, the cronyism, the contracts, the jobs that went to people who shouldn't have gotten those jobs, certainly are not fully qualified for them. The amount of work that has not been done in critical areas, the poverty, the sustainability of our fiscal condition, tourism, oh my goodness, tourism, the hospital. And now they've got to worry about what's going to happen with the emergency management of this island, because right under their nose, $2.8 million in questioned overtime. One employee making $775,000 over a 6-year period. And the public, rightfully so, should be pissed at the Leon Guerrero Tenorio administration. For Kandit News, I'm Troy Torres. Good night, and God bless you all.